Hi again, everyone. I am Chad Harberts, and this is the Chad Harberts Show. It's summertime. We'd normally be talking baseball and softball, get some of those kind of coaches, administrators on there, but this whole eighth graders playing all varsity sports thing just keeps building. It's morphing, it's changing. We're getting some guidance from the state associations. And so I wanted to stay on that topic because it's just a huge change in Iowa high school sports history. And I had the great coincidence to have a common connection with Coach Birks, who's the athletics director and head football coach at Audubon. Audubon's on the west side of the state. I'm way over here in the northeast, but he reached out because we have some mutual friends. And I said, hey, let's get on the air and talk about what's going on, because you've got 8-man football. You're also an administrator. This is a big time topic. So we are very happy today on the Chad Harberts Show to have a great guest in Coach Birks. Great to be joined now by the athletics director and football coach at Audubon, Coach Birks. Coach, thanks for coming on the show.
You bet. Appreciate having me.
Coach, I've watched the 39-minute webinar on this whole situation, which I think there was like 380 people on it yesterday. I've read all of the documentation I can find about having eighth graders eligible to play varsity sports. And now I'm even more unhappy about how the government has handled this, because it looks like they said they can play all varsity sports, but you guys figure it out.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. But both associations, the IHSAA, the boys and the girls union, have both come out to say, wasn't our idea, but we'll make the best of it. Kudos to their leadership. And then they've had a webinar this week to outline it a little bit. They've got some FAQs and some commonly answered questions, but they've also both been very upfront and honest about there's going to be some mistakes made. There's going to be some learning as we go. And I think that's just part of anything, but especially when this feels this rushed. When they say August 1, it's a go, and we're sitting here almost July 1, and it's a month out, and we're trying to make the best decisions for our districts and for our kids, for our families, and try to be as similar as possible to everyone. But when there's very little top down, then you allow for a lot of that local control, which allows different districts to be different, which allows us to be, this district's doing this, but this district's doing that. There's just a lot of questions and a lot of angst and a lot of anxiety for sure.
And for you, you're an administrator, but you're also an 8-player football coach. And I know you're a powerhouse. You were a state semifinalist a year ago, and you had, I think, 35 guys on your roster. But I've got some teams in my area that have 10 guys on their roster. So the most likely scenario of an 8th grader playing varsity football is probably at the 8-player level. Not your team, but there are going to be some teams, I think, that might not have a choice but to send an 8th grader out there. And that seems to me like it could be a terrible idea.
Yeah, I think first of all, we have to figure out it doesn't matter, but the thought of it is, where is it a numbers thing or is it a talent thing, right? Was this put in place to allow 8th graders who are Division I talents that aren't being challenged at the 8th grade level that can play varsity sports? That's an easy check, go on. As a Madden Greenway in Minnesota right now, just played 6 years of high school basketball, scored 5,000 points, was a 1,000-point score before she came to high school. That decision in Minnesota, obviously it was already made before her, but makes a lot of sense in her case. If it's a number situation, which we're kind of hearing that maybe it can help in some number situations, that's where I, as an AD and as a coach, have major issues with the legislation. Number one, you're going to have teams that can't fill a roster with 9-12, but 8-12, we can get by with it, which for some sports, it's not all that bad, right? Golf, tennis, there's some sports we have right now. Those are 2 of them that we don't have a junior high program, that allowing 5 years worth of players in a non-contact sport, great, go for it. But the football side of things, especially, I think is the biggest concern. I'm on the Iowa Football Coaches Association board of directors, and we wondered if there'd be the SMAC group, the Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. We thought maybe they'd come down with some recommendation to say, hey, everything else but football. We get there's non-contact sports. We get that there's even contact sports, but football's a collision sport, and we can control in our practices and we can control in our drills, but you can't control on a Friday night when you're going against another team. And as you pointed out in your show last week that I listened to, most of these 8th graders on small schools are going to be smaller kids. They're going to be skill position players that are in these collisions. They're kick returners, they're punt returners, they're slot receivers, they're running backs, where there's more chance for injury. And I think that's a concern. And then when more kids are getting hurt, less kids go out. And that, in fact, doesn't help the numbers. And the other side of it is just in my neck of the woods as AD especially is if we don't have the numbers 9-12 for a program, but we can pull 8th graders up. If you have a ton of 7th graders that can still keep playing junior high, that's one thing. But if all you're doing is robbing Peter to pay Paul and you no longer have a junior high program for a year or two, and it's just delaying the inevitable, that doesn't seem like it's a great fix either.
And especially because there's no do-over here. If you put a kid, an 8th grader on your football roster, even that kid doesn't play a game or two, it seems like from what the state's saying, if you put him on that roster, that kid cannot play junior high football that year or any other year.
Yeah, so that was the question that I had right away was what does this promotion relegation look like? And it's the equivalent to being on the Chicago Cubs roster for opening day. There's no chance you get sent down to AAA. And if you start the opening day in AAA, there's no chance to be called up to the big leagues either. So for us, that means you're going to have to encourage more high school coaches to be able to either watch junior high games, watch junior high practices, and or bring all the 8th graders in for the first day of practice. It's really slippery slope. And I really wish there was maybe a little better process for that, because it feels like you get one chance here and not all kids are created the same. And if you have a workout or a tryout for an AAU team and they make the A club or the B club or the C club, there's still some chance for later on to move or to a different tournament to play up or whatever that might be. But for this one, you're at that level for that year. And I think in our case in Audubon, we're going to develop some plans and things I'm talking to other ADs and other coaches about. As of right now, unless it's obvious that they can be a varsity contributor, those 1 in 1,000 kids, those Division I kids, it's probably best to just leave them alone.
But then you get, and it's how it always comes down, it's how these rules start to become rules, and it's how it always ends up in the laps of ADs and coaches, because somewhere across the state, you're going to have parents who say, if my kid can't play here in 8th grade, my kid's going to play somewhere else. So make a choice. And the kid might have some talent, but as a coach, the kid's not a varsity player. But the parent doesn't think the same way as a coach. And that's what's starting to bother me is you're going to be put over a barrel by parents who think their kids are better than they really are.
Yeah. And I think that's where we're hoping that there's some conference agreements or some area agreements. The transfer rule is still there where you have to set out 140 calendar days now so that hopefully it's not, I'm mad after 2 weeks and I'm going to go play immediately, because then you have to sit out anyway. So at least it's not free and open to transfer anywhere. But as of right now, where the way the rule's written with 8th graders, they're not technically part of that high school scholarship rule yet. There's no eligibility requirements. There's no scholarship requirements. So maybe those 8th graders are free to play a game of 8th grade in one school and be mad about it and go play varsity at another school. That's something that we need a little more clarification on. I don't know if anyone has it, but that was a fear right away as soon as it came out and talking in our conference AD meetings back in the spring was, if we don't have some sort of similar setup from district to district, and Audubon's not allowing 8th graders to play varsity basketball because we have 25 kids, and a neighboring district that has 12 kids says, yeah, we're just going to allow all of our 8th graders to play JV or varsity, whatever, high school level. Who's to say an 8th grader at Audubon doesn't want to switch districts and have that opportunity to play high school wise? So that's definitely a major concern on our behalf at this point in time.
And if one of your conference teams brings all their 8th graders up to the high school level and you've now lost a junior high game. You now have to find somebody else, and finding junior high games is very difficult to begin with.
Yeah. And one thing that my superintendent, Trevor Miller, who's on the board of the Iowa High School Athletic Association. So he's a former coach. He's got high school kids. So I have an administrator that's very much in the loop. So he and I have been bouncing ideas off each other. And the other night he said, in our conference, we're moving to the Rolling Valley Conference next year, which is primarily 8-man type schools. There's probably some girls basketball programs in that district. Let's just use girls basketball for the example, because I know that's the biggest one with roster sizes that's been talked about, is if there's a lot of schools that are only going to play one game at the junior high level, a combined 7th, 8th grade game, maybe play 2 extra quarters, maybe a 6-quarter night. And then the next night you play that school and it's the same thing. They don't have enough for JV. So they're going to play just a varsity game or maybe 2 quarters of varsity. What's keeping some of these schools from putting their 8th graders at varsity at the high school level and just playing those 8th graders as part of that JV program and having one 7th grade game? Now you get a full JV game, and then there's other schools that have a full varsity, and that works for that school. But as we learned yesterday in the association, you can't take an 8th graders that are playing JV and have them play against another junior high, because it's a high school versus junior high event. Even though they'd all be 8th graders, they've played at that level. So it's one of those things where being proactive, getting numbers ahead of time, what are each districts doing? What are you in the conference? What are you doing? There's just a lot to go on there, a lot to unpack.
I love high school sports. I love at all levels. I support it. I do everything I can to promote it. And I'm just having a really hard time with this because I have talked to over a dozen people in the last 4 or 5 days, and I have yet to have anybody tell me why this was a great change, how it makes sense. Because I had a football coach tell me, if you bring that eighth grader up, even to the freshman level or the sophomore level, and that eighth grader takes a freshman or sophomore spot, it's more than likely that freshman or sophomore is just going to quit. So you haven't fixed the roster number at all.
Yeah, I think that's legit. I think the psychological aspect of it, the maturity aspect of it. I was a former baseball coach, and when I would have eighth graders come day one that are baby-faced eighth graders, and they're hanging out and they're hearing the things the juniors and seniors are talking about on the bus ride or in the dugout or whatever, that's early enough for those things to be happening and the mixing to go on. First day of football in August, when they haven't even started a day of eighth grade and they're basically seventh graders compared to some 17, 18, 19-year-olds in high school. There's just such a big maturity gap and age gap and just differences there. What happens to your hallways and your classrooms when one eighth grade girl gets called up to a varsity volleyball roster and the rest of her classmates are playing junior high? You start going in with that of, oh, you're the varsity kid, or you're the high school kid, or you're the a special, whatever those things are. And there's just a lot that goes into that, that if we're gonna make that call to bump that kid up or let that kid go that next level, we're gonna have a checklist of ideas. We're gonna have a checklist of things to discuss as far as what we're gonna do in Audubon. It looks, in talking to Mr. Miller, I think we're gonna have it be head coach recommendation to the AD and head coach sit and go through bullet points A through P or whatever it is. It's going to be a bunch of them. Do they check all these boxes? Do we have any concerns? And then go to the parent and say, hey, we've talked about this. The coach thinks this. The AD thinks this. Here's where we're at, and go from there. And hopefully we catch some of those things where if it doesn't check all the boxes, if it's not right, let's not. But every situation is going to be unique. Every district's unique, which I get is why they're allowing some of that local control. But there's just going to be so many unique scenarios that weren't prepared, that weren't thought out, because we were given less than 6 weeks to try to hammer it out. And we had a couple of really good eighth grade boys last year that were really good basketball players. They would have been an interesting study, because if we called them up to the JV level, they could have played JV for sure. They play a lot of AAU ball. They might have been all the way varsity ball. I don't know. Well, we don't know that. But you take them off that eighth grade team that had one loss in I think we went 10-1 or 11-1, whatever it was, a really good eighth grade season, and promote them to the high school level. They may not have that kind of success. They may find out they shouldn't have gone, and there's no going back. And those eighth graders that were able to be role players and bench players are now thrust into major roles and starting roles, and we probably only win 1 or 2 games instead of lose 1 game. So there's just a lot to consider and a lot to unpack in every scenario. And there's a lot of cons for the pros that we're coming up with.
And for you as an administrator, you've got to think about 13-year-olds in locker rooms, 13-year-olds on school buses with juniors and seniors. And we know the school systems have done a tremendous job of stamping out a lot of the bullying that used to go on back when I was in school years ago. A lot of that's gone now. A lot's been taken away. But at the same time, there's still that 5-year gap between kids, and the way kids think as an eighth grader, the way kids think as a senior are really night and day different.
Yeah. And I've heard multiple people talk about it in different avenues. I'm worried about the junior high and middle school impact of your guest last week had talked about. Is this a sign that 7th grade is being eliminated from the school? If we're going to be 8, 12, everything, it would be nice to know that now. Is 6th grade coming later on to replace 8th grade so that we just have 6, 7, and 8, 12? Is this truly intended to be the Division I athletes that aren't being challenged and they're not at the right level, that may never ever happen in Audubon? Just having those things instead of this blanket unknown, do what you want, interpret it as you want, and trying to make the best of it, because we're gonna have to do something. But and my thought is in Audubon is school programs that we have that don't have a junior high, green light them, right? We've got tennis and golf in the spring that kids don't get to do until they're freshmen. Let them come in as 8th grade, be practice JV. Great. That's great. That's helpful. And if it's a Division I athlete, I haven't had any Audubon in quite a long time, but I'd love for some to start showing up. But when that happens, green light, go. Great. Yes, it's easy to tell that kid's physically ready to go. But we're going to have a lot more in small town USA that is, hey, we only have 11 football players, but we can get by with another year without having to combine our program, rather than what's best for your school and best for your program. And what's best for those kids is maybe explore a co-op, maybe play JV for a year, whatever it is. Because if you don't have a feeder program, if you don't have a junior high and a JV and a varsity, you're not set up for success. And that's something in Audubon that we've been really good in football the last few years. And to be quite honest, we are going to play, when we look at our summer rotation this summer, we got 30-ish kids out for football this fall coming to summer workouts. And we're starting 8 guys, and we've got 2 or 3 bench guys we feel really good about on both sides of the ball. And all 11 to 12 of those guys are juniors and seniors. We know that not every small school is in that situation. I get it, but that's always the goal, to have your juniors and seniors ready to go. They're 17, they're 18, they're physically, maturely, mentally, they check all those boxes, and allows your freshmen and sophomores to play JV, allow them to have some success, to process the game at a slower rate, and then allows your junior high kids to go play theirs. And Audubon on a Monday night, I would love to see our junior high play 4 to 6 quarters, our JV to play 4 quarters, and then on Friday our varsity plays 4 quarters. If you're getting that full 12 to 14 quarters across 3 levels year after year, that makes a difference. Our kids start in 4th grade doing the same thing. 4th, 5th, 6th feeds into 7, 8, feeds into JV, feeds into varsity. And that's the same for any sport. And if all of a sudden you're robbing your junior high program and playing those 9 basketball players in 5 grades to play varsity, and your 7th graders no longer have the opportunity, the next year when they come to 8th grade, they're not going to be ready, let alone ready to play at the varsity level. So feels like there's a lot of domino issues that can take place as well.
As you're talking about that, I'm thinking about how this was basically dumped on the boards of education to make their own rulings as far as their school. But boards of education are made up of elected people. It's not school officials, it's elected people. And I think about what happened at Traer at North Tama 3 years ago. When North Tama, when I was in the 80s, they were a powerhouse in our conference, the North Iowa Cedar League. They have fallen by the wayside population-wise. And 3 years ago, the administration really wanted to go to 8-player. And the school board said no. Said, we're not doing that. It's going to take away 3 opportunities. So they took 2 more years of beatings in Class A, and then finally went to 8-player where they belong, where they're one of the smallest 8-player teams in the state right now. But the school boards are elected people. Are they going to do what's best for the athletes, or are they going to end up having to listen to the most influential parents, especially in these small towns where influential parents are really influential?
And some of those influential parents end up as school board members as well. There's going to be scenarios where there's school board officials that are making decisions in the back of their mind in front of a room, who knows what it is, and it's directly impacting their family and their kids, which is a really tough thing to do as well. You hope that the board listens to the superintendent, listens to the administration, listens to the AD. I'm going to go in and speak to ours in July, because every board pretty much at their July meeting has to be ready to adopt something. But once again, the Board of Ed has said these are emergency rules. There's going to be real rules later on. I'm not sure why we couldn't kick this down the road a year and just start with whatever that final plan is to save us some of these headaches. But you're absolutely right. I think all of us are seeking each other out. There's been a lot of emails, a lot of texts, a lot of phone calls of, hey, what are you doing? Hey, can you send me a copy of this? Whatever that looks like. And I know Mr. Keating and Mrs. and Aaron were talking on the Zoom the other day. Are school boards going to have a template at least, or something that they go on of what's the standard board procedure? But as of right now, there's a lot of us recreating the wheel, and hopefully we communicate enough and are similar across the board. But when you allow that, there's going to be differences. There's going to be chances to, say, hey, this district is doing this. Why aren't we doing that? It's going to create a lot more meetings. It's going to create a lot more board policies. And you hope that things are done the right way, but just the way it is, there's going to be loopholes. There's going to be issues. There's going to be questions. There's going to be readopting and adding things as we go. I'm fortunate, Audubon, our board is great. Our board has been very supportive. We've gone through sharing some co-op stuff with the Exire HK. We've gone through sharing a superintendent now as well. And our board has very much been on the board of what's best for programs, what's best for kids. So it's in my lap right now to try to get some things written up with Mr. Miller and go to our board in July and see what questions they have, because we're seeing it through the school lens. They see it through a parent lens and a community lens and see what else they're hearing. But there's lots of layers here.
And you're one of those schools, like you just said, you share girls basketball. And with that, they've modified some of the sharing rules to make it better. Because there's a situation that happened here more than a few years ago, but it happened here where one smaller school joined a larger school. It was just 2 kids. Now, neither one of them ever played varsity, but it bumped that larger school up a class where they lost the state championship. They would have won if they'd stayed in the class they should have been in. But now we've at least modified that sharing rule a little bit to make it so it's not such a bad bump if for like you and EHK are combined.
Yeah, we went to a 1.25 counting. So you count 100% of the bigger school and 25% of the smaller school. It's helped us personally. We went to before it was adopted, we went to the state softball tournament in class 2A. And since then, now we bumped back to 1A with the counting. But for us, when you're looking at long-term plans, long-term sharing, co-ops, for us, you don't want it to be a one-year Band-Aid, but sometimes it works that way. For us, you'll try to see the numbers coming up. You try to see that it's going to be, we agreed on our board, we want it to be at least a 2-year agreement every time. So you don't feel like someone's got 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And then some of the districts now that have figured out what the 1.25 counting looks like, there's some more districts that probably need to take a look at some of their programs and say, hey, for the next 2 years, 4 years, whatever, let's try this. There's some 8-man programs in the state that could share with their neighboring 8-man school in the state and stay 8-player. So there's some of those things going on that I think some more of those conversations will be sparked. But once again, is this rule a Band-Aid to allow some of these schools, hey, we can bring our 8th graders up. We don't have to do a co-op, which doesn't take advantage of that. So we're in a position where we've looked at it to say every sport other than football, if we share, is going to be able to stay 1A. Girls with 5 classes, we can stay together for softball, basketball, etc. Anything with 4 classes, which is the majority of boys plus tracks and other spring sports, we can stay in 1A. And in wrestling, we can stay 1A as well. So for us, it makes a lot of sense to do the co-op piece. And it allows you, as I mentioned earlier, to keep kids at the right levels. It allows your 7th and 8th graders to play junior high. It allows what we thought about even before is there's times where our 9th graders and 8th graders in softball and baseball, we've had some JVR programs where we've had 3 levels sometimes. We're playing 1A baseball, 1A softball, but our 8th graders are playing 11 a.m. games during the day, really more little league-like. The next year they play JV, and then by sophomore year, maybe they're ready to play varsity. And trying to get that developmentally ready. And this 8th graders being bumped up, majority of them are not developmentally ready. And we hope that most schools interpret it as only if those special kids are there to do that, or if everyone in the conference, like I mentioned before, wants to make their 8th graders play high school so you can play JV. But we'll see what comes of that as well.
Do you think that there will be some conferences that kind of carve out their own rules?
I think you're going to have to, or at least be on the same page. I think especially with this tight of a turnaround, I think everyone's going to try to lean on each other because everyone's going through everything at the same time. And the problem with us in our area is the Rolling Valley is a 1A district covering an hour-ish, hour and a half from corner to corner over in rural Western Iowa. The Western Iowa Conference, which is next to us on one side, and the West Central Conference on the other side are primarily 2As, and then the Hawkeye 10 is primarily 3A. There's a long geographic distance between 1A conferences where we're at, where what works for us and what works in our conference, will that work for other 1As or will it work for other 2As around us? Maybe not. So I think you have to look at what fits you best because that's the vast majority of your schedule. And then again, at the district level too, if someone in the conference like, yeah, everyone else go ahead, but we just aren't going to do that, it's still local control at the end of the day.
But I also think about, as a guy who referees sub-varsity football and basketball and lacrosse, I also think about, everybody knows how stretched thin you are referee-wise on the western side of the state. Some of those guys are working 6 nights a week. So if you start having to rearrange schedules, junior high schedules and whatnot, it makes it even more difficult to find referees to work all your games.
Yeah, and one thing we talked about is when this first dropped was right now, let's use basketball, for example. Baseball can be an example as well. But for a majority of time, our 7th and 8th grade are playing at their level, their games. Right now, we have a 7th grade game and an 8th grade game. And then at high school, we have a JV game and a varsity game. That's majority of sports are going to have that set up, or an A, B, and junior high, however you want to do it. But in general, most sports, especially basketball, have 4 levels: 7th grade, 8th grade, varsity. If you slide all these 8th graders up and have this JVR level, when do you play those games? Who are they playing against? Because others have to do the same thing. And all you've taken is the divide of 4 being 2 and 2 to be 3 and 1, right? You've created varsity JV, JVR to be 3 high school levels and then 1 in 7th grade. And for us, when you look at junior high basketball, a lot of times we have 7 to 10 junior high kids out for each team. So then in practice, we can practice 7th grade against 8th grade. We have a 7th grade coach and an 8th grade coach. You slide those 8th graders and their coach to the high school level, you have a gym with 28 to 30 kids. How many kids are getting on the court at a time with 5-on-5? Even split court, maybe cross court with 3 coaches. However, then you go down to the other gym and you look at your 7th graders that are having to play 3-on-3 or run through plays by themselves, 5 on air. There's a lot of things you have to take into account with that.
Absolutely. Well, let's switch gears here and talk about Audubon football. Another great year last year. You guys have had it rolling now for 5, 6, 7 years in a row. You've got a big squad for an 8-man squad compared to what I see in my area. What are your prospects going forward for this year?
Yeah, we feel really good. We've got last year we made it back to the Dome for our 3rd trip in the last, I think it's 6 years or something like that. And we started a lot of sophomore skill guys. A lot of our big guys up front were juniors. And then we had some seniors that played some really big roles, but we're not necessarily a group like that. So when you look at what comes back, just overgeneralizing, our sophomores that are now juniors are mostly our skill guys. Our juniors that are now seniors are our linemen. And like I said, we feel pretty good about 10 to 12 guys on both sides of the ball, with almost all of them being juniors or seniors. You pull up bound and you look at last fall and you look at sophomore quarterback, sophomore running back. For us, those are primary ball carriers. And then up front, we started 2 juniors and a senior on the offensive line. The defensive line, we started 2 seniors and a junior. We'll probably have less. We went one way with our O-line and one way with our D-line, with numbers being at 35 and that kind of talent. This year, we're not quite to that level, but we're to the point where if with 10 to 12 of our guys that we trust, we feel like we can have a lot more guys go 2 ways. But we're going to be big. We're going to be pretty deep with juniors and seniors, and quite a bit return. We're really excited about what we've got.
It seems like that 8-man division, as it gets bigger and bigger, because that's what's happening, it seems like there's a bit of a separation between the haves and the have-nots, to almost to a point where, even though I know the state's against this, you're almost looking at a spot where you almost need a D1, D2 level of 8-man football, because the ones who really don't have the numbers, and Meskwaki Settlement's 45 minutes from here. I go down there, I referee lacrosse quite a bit. I love their coaches, I love their kids, but they had 10 kids out for football last year. You can't compete with Audubon at any level with 10 kids. It's just not going to happen. So do you think, as you look at 8-man football, which you know way better than I do, but as you look at you and Iowa Valley and Don Bosco and Gladbrook Rhinebeck and the halves that have been around now for a while, do you think that maybe that division is getting too big to be one division?
Yeah, I don't know, because I think most years that cut is nowhere near 30 to 35. That would be the middle of the class. I think, and a lot of the time, if you go strictly enrollment, a lot of those really good teams are still in the smaller half. When you look at Remsen St. Mary's and the run they were on the last 5 or 6 years, I know when they went and looked at the enrollment piece, when they started looking at changing the multiplier and free and reduced, there was a year where they looked at the dome teams, and I think 3 of the 4 in the dome are lower half in enrollment. So that's where it's tricky, is you'd have to use enrollment, because unless you're using some sort of success factor, which hasn't been a thing in Iowa, and that hasn't been great. And then the other problem, like I said, is it seems like most years you can tell who are the favorites to the dome, or at least who are the favorites to be in the quarterfinals, the top 4 to top 8. And sometimes there's like every bracket, wherever you cut it, sometimes you're like, oh, like last year, there was probably 5 dome teams. Us and Iowa Valley played the 4-5 game at their place, tremendous quarterfinal game, down to the final play. They could have, and then we went to the dome. They could have been a dome team as well. But after the other 3 quarterfinal games go to the dome weren't extremely close. So I just think that the way 8-man football is, with the amount of grass and players on it, it leads to few more explosive plays. It's harder to play defense. You end up with more explosives, which allows that scoreboard to get out of hand. So I think there's a lot of factors that go in there, but I don't think we're headed that way. Maybe there's a way to get a little more creative with non-districts and with scheduling. We've talked before about maybe you go to less districts. You only play 5 teams in your district, and then you try to tier them a little bit, of make sure all your tier 1s have 1 or 2 games against each other. Because then I think also when you get to the playoffs, I think you have more data points to say, if you have 8-8-0 teams and none of them have played each other, sometimes it's hard to seed that, because we get that a lot of times in 8-player. But I'll give the credit, when 8-player coaches started getting a chance to pick non-district games a few years ago, we've had some really big games in non-district. Audubon played Remsen and Fremont last year. Lennox played Woodbine. Bishop Garrigan played St. Ed's. You had Bosco playing Gladbrook. You had Iowa Valley playing Bosco, and I think they had one other one that was out of district. So across the state, you can almost make this kind of connection across districts. that's not a guarantee every year. And sometimes when you pick someone, all of a sudden they have a down year. We picked Remsen St. Mary's last year. They'd been really good. They'll be better this year, but they were young last year. So sometimes those games on paper from the year before don't translate because, especially in small schools, one senior class graduates and things change. We went from dome to 4-6 and losing by 70 in the playoffs from 21 to 22. It can happen to anybody.
Sean, I really appreciate your time. I know you got a lot ahead of you because this should have been, as you said, and as an administrator told me the other day, this should have been a 1 year out thing, not a 6 week out thing. But as a guy who loves high school sports, loves talking about it all day long, I really appreciate guys like you who are going to be putting in the work to try to do this, to protect these kids and make sure this goes right, because there's just so many ways it can go wrong.
Yeah, I appreciate your coverage. I appreciate you diving into the legislation and getting people in to talk about it, because it's really impactful. And people that maybe if you've had your head in the sand and weren't aware it was coming, maybe you haven't thought about it at all. But regardless, when those emergency rules hit, we all have to make the best of it. And both of our associations do a great job of trying to do what's best for the schools, and our schools are doing what's best for kids. And I feel like there's things in place, and you can always say, we'll figure it out, it'll be fine. But the reality is what that process looks like. It could be a hectic next 6 weeks for some of us that are trying to enjoy some vacations and some downtime after summer baseball and summer softball, but we'll do what's necessary. And hopefully we're ready to go for a July board meeting. Hopefully there's some of those conversations amongst conferences so that we don't have this wild gamut of what it looks like from district to district. Just because we're allowed to, doesn't mean we should.
Sean, good luck this season. I don't get out west very often, but if you can get back to the Dome, I will definitely see you there.
That's the goal. Every year we set out to make the playoffs, play indoors, and win a state title. And we've checked a lot of those off. Goal 1 and goal 2, we're searching for goal 3. And then that's the goal this year, to get back to the Dome and finish it off.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it.
Take care. Really appreciate Sean Birks coming on the show today. That was a fabulous interview. I love talking to him. We try to get to every corner of the state and talk high school sports. And for me to reach out to the West, we don't get over to very often, but to reach out there and talk to Sean, just a great conversation, a lot of great insight on what's going on in this next 6 weeks to get these 8th graders, get the guidance we need to see what's going on as far as will they play high school, will they play junior high, how's it going to work out? And I trust with 380 different coaches and administrators on that meeting on Wednesday with the 2 state organizations, I trust that these guys and gals will do the best they can for the athletes and for their coaches. Because as I said last week, and I will say this until somebody tells me I'm wrong, but the government does this. They hand down this rule. They hand it down with almost no guidance. They hand it down with 6 weeks to go in the summer as far as high school sports, because tennis and golf, they start August 3rd or August 4th this year as far as practices, competitions. They start before school starts. So they gave these administrators 6 weeks to figure this out, which is ridiculous. It's everything that's wrong with government, which is, here's a problem I'm handing to you. You didn't want it, but I'm going to give it to you. And here's 6 weeks to figure it out. It only impacts 340 or so high schools across the entire state of Iowa and just thousands and thousands of high school kids. But go ahead, here it is. You deal with it. Typical government. But I really appreciate the way that people like Sean Birks and all of these administrators are working hard to try to figure this out, what's best for the kids. And I think, as I heard in the meeting yesterday with Tom Keating, with Aaron Gerlich, the 2 administrators of the 2 high school associations, this will be fine in a couple years. We got to get past the nerves, work out the little quirks, and in a few years it'll be fine. Like every other change has been fine. Once there was just 1 class, then there was 2 classes, and 3, 4, 5. Now there's 7 classes when it comes to high school football. Things do work out eventually, but typically they're better planned than this one was. But I still believe these administrators and these coaches will work this out. It will be good. It will be bumpy at times, but it will be good in the end. So thank you so much to Sean Birks. Thank you for watching the Chad Harberts Show. I greatly appreciate it. We love talking high school sports here on the Sports Guys Iowa Network. Check out all of our great shows on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. And if you want to talk high school sports or hear about high school sports, hit subscribe. I'm around all the time. I can talk high school sports all day long. Have a great night, everyone.